Hey guys, okay, so the next thing we're going to be doing with our kits is we're actually going to be icing them. One of the biggest things about that people get confused with sometimes when icing kits is especially because you've got two separate colours that you have to make. And one colour, for example, red, needs an awful lot of food colouring, whereas something like cocoa powder actually dries the icing, and therefore you end up needing to add a little bit more milk to it. So what I wanted to say is, it always says it on the recipe card, hopefully, but it says the icing will be very thick at this stage. And I understand there's this temptation to go, oh, it's too thick, and you add the milk straight away. Please don't do that now. So basically what you need to realize is that if you add a lot of food coloring, it's liquid, it's doing the same job as the milk. If you add in cocoa powder, it's drying it out, you're gonna need to add a bit of milk. So what you need to do is keep it really thick. You can see it's like proper thick, unspreadable, and you split it into the two bowls, half and half for this particular cake, and you then add your food colorings or whatever it is that you need to add, and then adjust the thickness after you've done it. So you can see we've got two halves with this one. For one half I'm going to add cocoa. With the cocoa powder, you can basically add as much as you like, and then you can always add more to it. I wouldn't put in the whole lot straight away, especially because we've done for halves. The bag of icing is designed for a whole thing. So I'm actually going to mix the icing one with the beaters, and then we'll do the power. Ooh, there we go. So you can see it's still making it quite thick. So I think, to me, that's still a little bit light in its brown colour. For this particular one, some cakes you'll find you want it lighter and some cakes you want it darker. So I'm going to add some more. The other thing to remember with butter icing, is that actually when you add the milk, I'm going to add just a little bit of milk at a time. You're supposed to measure. Measure, it says 1 teaspoon at a time. That's my teaspoonish. The actual milk also can make the icing that little bit darker. So you can see the icing's now getting a little bit more malleable. Try not to be tempted to dump a bucket load of milk in there at first. Just start with a little bit. You can even do, I sometimes do this trick, because you know when you do that and then your hand spills and you end up with it all in there. Sometimes I'll just pour it into the lid. Or you can measure it with a teaspoon, which I think is what the instructions say. So you can see that that's getting to be quite a good consistency now. Turn it off. Okay. So we'll put this one over here. So with the red food colouring, so there's a couple of things to know with red. You are never going to get it as red as the fondant. Fondant is really dark brick red, and butter icing, if you try and get it brick red, it will curdle, and your icing will get like little floaty white bits on top, which is actually the butter separating out from the icing. So you just put a couple of teaspoons in, keep checking the consistency. I wouldn't put more than 2 or 3 into half of the icing. And then you need to trust that, one, it looks a bit more pinky in the bowl. And when you put all the other fondants on top, it'll look more red. And the second thing to trust is that when it dries darker than it does when it's thin. So just let it get to that red stage. So obviously we can put a bit in. So it's not like when you're doing other colours, you add a tiny little drop. So we can put a little bit in, like this. We'll have a mix up. So when you do this, you can already see that it's going to change the consistency of the icing. Can you see that icing's already more malleable than it was? So if you'd have added that milk to that straight away, you would have ended up with very, very, very runny liquid. So some people buy, they have red food colouring in their house at home that is like a powder, that's a real specialty one. If you really specifically want yours very dark red, you can buy these powders that you can use. But with the food colouring that we provide, you'll end up with just a a softer red. But the most important thing to understand is you can see already how much thicker this one is than this one. So we know that we need a bit more milk into this one to get it a similar consistency to the both. So the most important tip to remember is you add your extra milk at the end of the food colouring, not at the start.